Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you today with the newest iteration of the Canadian election prediction series. Um, we've had three new polls this week I've had three new polls added to my model this week. One's paywalled, so I'm not going to talk much about it, but I've also had a Ledger poll and a Main Street poll. The Ledger poll seems like an outlier, but Ledger's generally been pretty good, and none of their sub results are wild like last week's. Like, I would argue that their BC panel is probably skewed. Again, is skewed toward the Liberals because they're the only one who's pegging the Liberals ahead by like 10, 20 points in BC. But Ledger's been having the Liberals ahead by 10, 20 points in BC for a while now. So it is theoretically possible that they are correct, and it's not just a random error. It could just be a random error, though. So they are. I will include. I did include them this week, unlike last week, because they had one weird week where their Saskatchewan, Manitoba numbers were Liberals +7 in those two provinces. That's literally no other pollster has had Liberals ahead in those two provinces when you combine the two of them. And even if you look at this week, now the Conservatives are back in front of those provinces by +8 by the Ledger numbers. So, and I mean, even if you look at Main Street too, like Main Street is a very favorable, is generally been favorable to the Liberals, but this week the the Main Street poll this week was showing that the Liberals are only ahead by 2 points, and Conservatives are leading in BC, and I believe Main Street actually had them leading in BC by a lot, and also had Liberal or Conservatives. Sorry, the Conservatives were leading in BC by a lot, and I double check this offhand. I don't want to be, but if I recall correctly, they also were leading in doing quite well in the Maritimes. Now, mind you, the Ledger poll did have the Conservatives doing a much better time in the Maritimes than normal, but not quite as good as Main Street, and obviously not as good as the paywalled one I'm talking about. But again, subscriber agreements, so I can't really say too much. So there's really not been much movement, and I think that says we have settled in to a new happy, not a new happy, new status quo. So the Conservatives have gained a bump from the COVID status quo, and I think they still have the potential of going up because Aaron O'Toole still has very poor name recognition nationally. I think he's only at like 50% or something like that, people who have an opinion on him. So he has room to grow if he can do a good job and actually make people like him and not turn people off. I don't think Trudeau has any room to grow at this point. I think any room Trudeau has to grow is Singh's ground he's lost. So we will see. Singh has the potential to gain some room in the next little bit, and frankly, he really needs it. The NDP are looking like they're going to lose seats in Manitoba and BC, and they're definitely not picking up seats in Ontario or Quebec at this rate. So he needs to make some moves and show people what's what, and that the NDP mean business, and that they're not just liberals but more leftist. Just like the leftist side of the Liberal Party, the more leftist side of the Liberal Party. But I don't think Trudeau himself can make much movements. I don't think there's anything, barring, no, I don't think there's, from what it looks like, it doesn't look like Trudeau can really change the movement at this point. The only thing he can do is stop bleeding, and it looks like he'll be able to, but we'll see going forward if he can really hold that steady. I would say, as always, the The places to watch for this election, outside the obvious, which is GTA, which is every election, I think, because there's the Ledger poll this week and the Main Street poll, if I'm not mistaken, both had the Conservatives in a fairly strong position in Quebec. And obviously, a bunch of polls have also had the Liberals in a strong position in Quebec. Ledger continues to have Bloc in the front, though Ledger's. And I'm inclined to believe that, actually. I do think the Bloc are probably polling better than a lot of these other people are polling them at. Last election they were quite underestimated as well, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's going to be true for the next cycle. But so yeah, I think Quebec City area is going to be a place to look at come the next election. I think it's going to see where there's going to be a lot of movement, a lot of long-term movement. Because like always, Vancouver suburbs, Toronto suburbs, there's tons of movement in those suburbs literally every single election. But it's not, from what I can see and what I've looked into, there's never been long-term movement. It's not like 2015 election where the Liberals gained a bunch of seats in the Maritimes and have held them for at least one election and might hold them for another one. Like, even based on this polling, it looks like my model only has the Conservatives picking up 3 seats. So, considering going into 2015, if I recall correctly, the Conservatives had like 12 seats in the Maritimes. So the Conservatives have still lost a bunch of seats. And the Liberals have picked up for 2, maybe 3 election cycles. And I think we might see that happen in Quebec. But with the Conservatives picking up seats, swing ridings, sneaking up between the Bloc and the Liberals in some swing ridings like Trois-Rivières and I can't, Beauport, and there's another riding too. I'm blanking on it. Sorry, Quebecers, I'm not familiar with all your ridings. 78 of them, too many. I don't have any notes either. So there's a couple there that I think the Conservatives can make plays for, especially since they seem to be polling a lot stronger than they have been in the past in Quebec. Conversely, though, the Greens, they're not doing very good still. They're losing seats. I will admit that if I were to bet money on where my model is going to be wrong, it's going to be the Green Party. I would bet a good amount of money on that. That if I make an error, it is me underestimating the Green Party in my model. It's just the way that my model assesses, tries to rationalize pollster biases, that since the Green Party has traditionally been very biased, very overpolled, that I underrate their performance, but if they're actually being polled correctly, my model will completely underestimate them, which would be unfortunate, but that's what it is. I'm pretty confident with everything else go. And frankly, I could very well, I believe, I don't think it's unreasonable my model has the Green Party going down seats. The next election, like 2019 was very much an election where climate change was a huge issue. People don't care about climate change right now, really. If you look at, again, this is, I guess, paywall, but if you look at a bunch of, I've looked at a bunch of issue polling recently, and climate change doesn't even break like top 7, if I'm not mistaken. And there's been a bunch of recent polls too where people aren't willing to spend any more money fighting it. I think it was like $100 was how much people were willing to spend per person was willing to spend fighting it. That's like 80% of respondents, no more than $100. So you really get. I really don't see it being a big issue, and that makes it very hard for the Greens because green issues basically, the Greens are predicated on that issue. The Green's options at this point is to take the environmentalist left wing from the NDP, which is kind of weird to say, the left wing of the NDP, but I think NDP is vulnerable to that flank, especially if Singh doesn't balance this right and he looks like he's just a Trudeau minion or just a yes man to Trudeau. If he manages to strike a balance and he doesn't look like he's just a yes man, I think the NDP's fine. But that's really the only play I think the Greens have. And I really wouldn't be surprised if we only see Elizabeth May returning as an MP for the Greens next election, which I'm assuming is going to be March, April. And as time goes on, actually, I'm going to retcon one of my sentences I said earlier, where I don't think the Trudeau has much he can do to gain ground. And I'm going to rephrase that. I think Trudeau has a time bomb under him. That unless he can figure out something to handle it or to mitigate it, he's going to explode. And that's the debt. There was a recent report by Toronto Sun, which was saying that new estimates for the deficit this year is $450 billion. Let's assume for a second they're off by $50 billion, so it's only $400 billion. That means the last estimate has changed by 50, means since the last estimate of $343 billion, it has now increased by $57 billion. Right now, the fourth biggest issue is debt. Is government debt for the Canadians, for Canadian population. As coronavirus wanes down and economy shoots up and debt shoots up, I guess possibly healthcare might shoot up too, but I doubt it. I really don't feel like healthcare is going to move very much, because if coronavirus goes down, people are going to be less concerned about healthcare. Right? So I don't think healthcare will move much. I think you'll see debt go up and economy go up and higher concerns. And these are the these are the four biggest issues right now for voters. And two of those are terrible for the Liberals. Liberals poll quite poorly on economy management and very bad on deficit spending or budget management. And I think it's pretty safe to understand why they poll so poorly on deficit management. The budget will balance itself and has yet to run a single balanced budget. So we'll see going forward. Now I'm just going to pop over to the weekly numbers, the polling numbers. Wow. So this table, like last week, this is the actual real numbers spit out by my model. So as you can see, Liberals have a very slight lead in BC, which is 100% carried because of Ledger. So I'm questionable on that, but it's possible that they'll do that well at the expense of the Greens and the NDP. The Conservatives are only a few points off their 2019 numbers. So I think that kind of makes sense, and I think we're going to see that gap close. Saskatchewan and Manitoba are pretty stable. Alberta has gained a bit of ground. I think that's for the Conservatives to just gained a bit of ground. I think that's just people being better. Like Main Street has changed their polling methodology in Alberta and have been getting better results. And by better, I mean results that seem more rational with the 2019 result. I think Main Street had a 67% for the Conservatives, which, I mean, I don't think anyone is going to be sitting at home and be like, oh yeah, the Conservatives getting 67% in Quebec is unreasonable considering Alberta, since they got 69 last election. And again, I say this every time I make a video on polling. What has happened that would make the prairies, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, less conservative? That's why I'm really skeptical about a lot of this polling that is showing these provinces way lower than they were in 2019. What has happened that would make that happen? Why would they vote more liberal now? Especially following things like gun ban and stuff. Like, why? Why would that make these provinces less conservative? So I think it's the polling has just been terrible in these provinces. Probably BC too, honestly, but BC's more of the wild card of West Canada. They aren't as... They're closer... I guess in a way they're kind of like Manitoba in that they are more of a swingy province, in that the Liberals or the NDP can make gains in them, like long-term gains, but it's a little more than that. But BC is still has a very large section that is firmly conservative, which is why the polling you see from like Ledger, where they're polling at like 25%, it's like, no. There will never be an election where the Conservatives get 25% in BC. Sorry, I'll phrase that differently, not less absolute. There's no reason, there's nothing the Conservatives have done since 2019 which would make them lose 9 points in BC. If you think I'm wrong, prove me so in the comments. But what has changed? I think Ledger's wrong in that result, but I don't want to continue to exclude Ledger data from the model in case they're actually correct and I'm wrong, because what do I know? I'm a person analyzing data. I'm not the person actually gathering the data. Maybe they're correct. You're also seeing New Brunswick getting really close, and generally Conservatives gaining some ground in the Maritimes. And I think that is really good for them, though it must be said, they need to gain more ground in Ontario. Right now they are basically hovering. They're hovering a bit better than in 2019, but so are the Liberals, which is a wash. So, we'll see going forward. As always, if you want to support the channel, please like, share, subscribe, all of these things. Comment below in the comment section. Talk to me about polling. If you have any questions you want to ask about the model, any ideas where this might go forward, etc., etc. Yeah, anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day.